Hello, everyone. It is another edition of the CX Pulse Check here at Experience Action Podcast. I'm Jeannie Walters. As always, I am interested in hearing from you. So don't forget, you can leave me a voicemail. Just go to askjeannie.vip and I will answer your question on a future episode. But today is our special monthly episode where we dive into what's happening in the world in real time around customer experience. And I'm delighted to have a special co-host with me. Today we have David Avrin. David, welcome to Experience Action and the CX Pulse Check. So good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Looking forward to a great conversation. We'll roll up our sleeves, talk about the issues of the day,
There
and
you go.
and I'm ready.
Excellent. Well, David and I know each other through speaking and the National Speakers Association. You're the author of several books about customer experience and marketing and some other things. Anything else that people should know about you before we dive in?
Nothing that they need to know, but like you, I speak and I consult. I have a new book called Ridiculously Easy to Do Business With. We can talk about
Love
that
it.
later, but always eager to have a conversation about current events and how it pertains to our industry and how do we help business owners, leaders, and others create a dynamic, memorable, preferable customer experience.
Yep. Yep. And the world is changing so fast these days, right? Customer expectations change, the way we do business change, the way that our customers want us to do business change. So we have to constantly keep our finger on the pulse of not just what's happening in kind of the customer experience business, but in all businesses and in how people are living their real lives. So I love these episodes because we get to jump into not only what's happening where we live in the United States, but also around the world. And so the first article that I pulled out for us to discuss is from the New York Times, and it's called In Japan, Turning the Tables on Rude Customers. And really, this is about a shift that's happening in Japan, which it's noted is famous for their hospitality, their attention to detail. There's a lot of emphasis around service, around treating customers well, and basically telling them that they're right. And so now things are shifting because there is so much going on with when it comes to even, I hate to use this word, but kind of abuse of
Right.
service workers. So I think this is a moment in time where this might be a cultural shift there. So I'm just curious, what were your takes on this?
Well, part of the take was that we're seeing this trend of abuse towards service workers, call center employees, service workers. We're seeing that globally. It's a bigger issue in Asian cultures because there's such humility and there's such an emphasis on service. And so when service isn't doing well or it doesn't go well, the servers themselves feel obligated to humble themselves and ask for forgiveness. But what's interesting, and you sort of alluded to it at the beginning, was that our expectations, and we're all customers, right, of somebody or
Mhm.
clients, for speed and flexibility and convenience and simplicity of process, that's shifting dramatically, and it's shifting because of what other industries are doing, and it's training us to be. Some people call it spoiled. I don't. I just say we have an expectation of greater access or greater speed or whatever that might be. And so there's a clash there when you look at cultures like Japan, where people are very humble and of service at the
Mhm.
same time that some of those expectations might be unreasonable. And so when they're not met, and what the article certainly highlighted was that they're hurtling a great deal of abuse towards employees as a result.
Mhm.
And for the first time ever, they're having to, as companies, protect their workers and make some blanket statements and signage and others that says you cannot abuse our employees, and here's a standard.
Right.
And the standard had always been internal, but now they're exhibiting a standard externally, which is really new.
And I thought this was interesting because my minor in college years and years ago was sociology. And there is a sociological perspective to this where some of the workers were saying, well, we were told to kind of let them take it out on us because they've had a bad day or because their boss was mean to them and they have to give that to someone. So we'd rather have it give it to us than their families. And then it started escalating where you think about that bigger discussion of, is there a sociological thing happen where, if we are in a culture where bosses are told that it's okay to treat workers a certain way, how does that trickle down? And, the mission of my company from the beginning has been to create fewer ruined days for customers.
Nice.
And that's Thank you. And that's really because I believe that makes a better world. Because if we can really connect with people in that moment where they need something or we need to provide them something, then that means that they can really carry that with them instead of kind of piling on the negativity. But the other thing that struck me as I was reading this was a few weeks ago, everything's fine, but I ended up in the ER with my teenage son, and he has a tree nut allergy. And it was one of those unfortunate
Wow.
times, very scary, but he was fine. And a lot of it is just observation, right? They take care of him, and then you've got to just make sure everything's fine for the next few hours. So we were just kind of hanging out in the ER in one of their bays for several hours. Of course, it happened at 10:30 at night. Of course, because that's the only time
That's
kids
the only time
need.
our kids need to go to the ER. Yeah, we've been there.
And so we were there 2, 3 in the morning, and we were finally getting discharged. And the nurse came in and looked at my son, who's 17, and said, I just want to thank you for being so polite. I deal with a lot of kids here who are not as polite. And of course, I'm thinking, wow, that's so nice. And
Yeah,
I feel so proud of him. And then she left, and my son turned to me and said, I literally did the bare minimum. I said, please and thank you.
yeah. It's crazy that's for a standard. But you know what? Going back to the article, here's what's interesting. And you and I both consult for CX.
Hmm.
And when one of the things that I talk to organizations is that, you know what, we do everything we can to make sure that our customers don't leave unhappy. Because unlike 20 years ago, they have a bullhorn today that can
Yep.
reach around the world, right? The ramifications of underperformance can be pretty profound because they've got access to Yelp and TripAdvisor and Rotten Tomatoes and Glassdoor and social media.
Hmm.
But there is a line, and the line is abuse of our employees,
Hmm.
verbal threats and others. That's the non-negotiable. And I talk
Yep.
it when I train teams and others as well, as we do everything we can, even when we know we're right. We fall on our sword. I mean, why have an argument over something we're not going to win? Find a middle ground. What's it going to take?
Hmm.
We try and resolve the issues. The only non-negotiable is when abuse is hurled at our team. The
Hmm.
conversation's over. And at that
Yep.
point, we can only take the side of our employees. That cannot happen. It cannot be allowed to happen. And so it's an interesting cultural thing
Hmm.
in Japan, but I think in America, I think we're it's not that difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to have employees that don't have attitudes, but but we do everything we can to make it right, even if it's something we'll eat the cost
Hmm.
just to make sure they don't walk away unhappy. But that line is abuse or
Yep.
threats. Can't
Yep.
cross it.
And I think a key part of that in preparing our employees for that is understanding what that looks like, understanding that there are times where they could be frustrated and upset with the situation, and that can feel like they're attacking us personally, but really that's about kind of de-escalating that situation,
Sure.
helping them feel heard, all of those things, because it's not fun when somebody is taking it out on you as the
Right.
person. So that's why, yeah, I'm going to be very curious and be watching what happens in Japan because they have such
Yeah.
a long history of this, and now they're kind of shifting into this world where they might have to put different lines in the sand than they have in the past. So
But we're
that
we're
was.
also we're also cognizant globally of what conveniences and what products are available. So there's a
Mhm.
global aspect to all of it. There's a cultural thing there, but they're conscious of what we're doing as well. And I also
Absolutely.
talk to teams. I understand that impatience is not abuse.
Mhm.
Frustration is not abuse.
Mhm.
Abuse is abuse. And so part of
Yep.
it is just having those conversations. But employees need to know that the employers have their backs in those situations.
Absolutely. And there are real physiological responses to that too. And so even frustration and irritation, all those things, we still have to focus on the wellness of the people and give them breaks and give them coping mechanisms and all those things when they need them, because that's a real reaction that we can't always
Yeah.
control as
And
well. So.
and probably manifest no more so than what's happening with call centers right now.
Mhm.
We're in a pandemic of abuse. We know that attrition in call centers, 40% and more. And part of the problem is that organizations, and I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but they make it so difficult to talk to a real person. We're dealing with
Yep.
chatbots and AI that by the time somebody can actually navigate that and get to a person, they're already at a
Mhm.
12 in terms of frustration. And
Yep.
I think it's cruel what we're often doing to call center employees. But you're right, their wellness, giving them breaks,
Mhm.
rotating off difficult kinds of things. There's a lot of new strategies because being a call center employee is very different than it was even 5, 10 years
Yep.
ago.
It sure is. And I think making sure that the technology and the data is visible in the right places so that we can acknowledge, "Oh, I see you talk to a chatbot. I see where you are in the journey." That can make a
I
huge
know,
difference as
right?
well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next one where we are going to talk about something that I actually heard about this kind of through the grapevine first. And this is about Chipotle and the fact that they had a little bit of a rumor happening, and then it picked up on social media where customers were complaining that their portions were not what they used to be.
Yeah.
And so what happened was there was this kind of rumor that swept through social media that said if you pull out your phone and film, you'll get you'll get more portions. And
Right.
so people were doing this all over, and finally, Chipotle actually went and investigated. So this is from CBS News, Money Watch, and the headline is "Chipotle customers were right. Some restaurants were skimping," CEO says. And I thought the whole evolution of this was pretty fascinating because it really did come from social media. And then when you start hearing what both Chipotle did, and they even had some outside firms actually look into this, and there was a lot of news around this. And the flip side is the CEO came out and talked about it, which I thought was great. They talked about the fact that 1 in 10, they averaged 1 in 10 of their stores was not providing the appropriate portions. And the CEO really embraced this idea that part of their values as a brand is sizable portions. That's what people go there for. So they want to make sure that they are delivering on that throughout, but they're still they noted the inconsistency. And so I thought it was interesting that it was born from social media, but the other thing that I liked about it was the CEO kind of coming out and being a little
Falling
authentic
on its
and
sword. Yeah,
transparent.
you
Yeah,
bet.
exactly, exactly. So what do
Yeah.
you think about that?
Well, I think it's part of a trend. I mean, the most obvious thing on the front end is that inconsistency kills brands. Inconsistency
Mhm,
kills franchises even more because part of the promise of a franchise is that you have a consistent experience across it. So it's good on them that they were able to identify, and maybe it was just because they were responding to the social media trend. But we're seeing this across industries and a lot of drivers, right? And it's both skimflation and shrinkflation, right? And shrinkflation, of course, is less product in the same packaging. And we've been seeing that for years. You want to go on a real basic level. Do you remember when we were kids and we would get that Bazooka gum with the little comic inside, the little
oh,
pink
sure.
cube? Well, that used to be a solid cube. And now if you get a Bazooka, there's like these big ridges because they're just found a way to do less product within the same thing. But of
Mhm,
course, skimflation is something different, which is making us, well, from their perspective, food costs are high. So if we just give them a little bit less, we take that scoop and we shake it a little bit so it's not overflowing and it's just down to the line and it's just perfect. Well, it's not what we're used to. And so
mhm,
when they're skimping because of food costs, I get all that. I think the calculus is wrong. And the calculus is that we can save money by using less product. But the reality is, as customers, if we feel like we're getting cheated or we're
mhm,
getting skimped on, they've done everything they need. They brought us in. We went to their location, especially this retailer restaurant, right? We paid money and then we had a disappointing experience. It's like the antithesis of what we try to do. They're much better off raising their prices by 20 cents
mhm,
than giving us a less than experience because
mhm.
that carries forward. And we're not making decisions in a vacuum. We're not, should we go to Chipotle? No, we're like, we're hungry. And
Right.
you go to wherever they are. And within the same parking lot, there's six other restaurant choices.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I think from a management perspective, I think it's a very, very poor strategy of skimping. They're better off being transparent. But we're also seeing, I saw an article the other day. There was a story on the TV news of of not only expecting a 20% tip, but then they were doing a 10% surcharge for
Mhm.
increased labor costs and another fit. And you realize next thing you know, you're at 35, 40% on top of it.
Yep.
And then we feel like we're being nickel and dimed. You're better
Yep.
off rolling it into the price. So it wasn't surprising. Once again, good on the CEO for responding, but it's a trend we're seeing everywhere.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the shrinkflation and also the tipping because these are kind of becoming ubiquitous. And when we are I mean, the thing that always strikes me is you call around, you get, rates for hotels or you look at the site that tells you all the different rates, and then you actually go to book the room and it's like, 25 to 30% more because of the fees and this and that. And it's like, "Oh, you didn't want that room anyway, right? Like that room's a bad room. How about this room?" It just gets
Right. The
crazy.
resort fee and
Oh,
then the hotel and then the whatever tax and all those things.
yep,
Yeah, and some of them it's just the processing fee. I mean, it's all nonsense.
yeah,
Um, but
exactly.
I think we're getting wise to that, and I think
Mhm.
we're losing patience with that. There's
Mm.
been a lot of conversation lately. You do counter service and they flip the little white screen over and they're asking for a tip. And
Mhm.
like it's not our job to pay their team, but if we got
Right.
service, but if we're buying at the counter, it's like, really? And then
I
I saw
know.
one the other day, it started at 25%. So in 25, 30, and 35. And then of course you feel
Oh,
bad if you put in a custom amount. It's it it's a broad um dynamic of nickel and
mhm,
diming. And
mhm.
I do a lot of international travel as well. I'm in Europe in several cities in November, and you go over there and you don't tip
Yep.
because they pay their people, and so
Mhm.
that's a bigger issue long term. But back to the article itself, I think I think they create a very bad taste in our mouth, all pun intended, when we feel like we got cheated.
Yep, yep, and I think the other thing that struck me about how the CEO handled it was that really, he was basically saying, "You know what? We're gonna retrain and recoach these stores," which is great, but there were all sorts of questions about, "How about you use, like, a measuring cup?" How about
Yeah,
you create standards that people can follow? Because I think sometimes this happens in customer experience land too, where people say, just deliver a great customer experience to every customer every time. What's the big deal? And we don't go into the idea that, the way we approach it with our clients, it's a mindset, strategy, and discipline. You need to put some rigor to what is the experience that you want to deliver and how do you get there. And I think that that still is a little questionable to me with how they're handling it. But I am encouraged that they embraced it, they reacted to it, and they're being visible and authentic, which people want too. So
part of
it's
the challenge, though, real quickly, I'll just throw a last thing before we do the last
yeah.
article, is that if there's a dichotomy between what we have traditionally experienced and sort of the new policy, so they can roll this off and here's our new policy and here's the new measure.
Mhm.
And if that's less than what we're used to,
Oh, yeah.
what you can't do is you can't stop the conversation and it
Yep.
can grow very, very quickly online. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think we've seen that. Yeah, for
no,
sure. When
for
yeah,
sure.
that's not something you want, but so, David, we are, in the summer of 2024. It is an Olympic season. Have you been watching the
Woohoo! I
Olympics?
have. I'm a big nut. My father, who's passed away, was a big Summer Olympics fan, and I remember sitting watching with my dad.
Uh-huh.
Love the Olympics. The I love the heart of these young people. And as a father, we've got 5 kids who are no longer kids. Doesn't mean they're off
Mhm.
the payroll, but at least they're out of the house. Um, but yeah, I love watching it, and the
Mhm.
agony of defeat, and somebody works their whole life, and then by a 100th of a
Right?
second, they got the bronze instead of the gold, and it's just
Oh,
anyway, love every minute of it.
we've really been enjoying it too, and I love it. I love it every time it comes up, I think, "Oh, yeah, it's the Olympics," and then suddenly I'm like, USA. I'm like
Right.
chanting in my living room, and it's just a fun, I think, universal feeling. But, I thought this was interesting. This is a little different. It's not quite CX for us, but, the article is actually off of Medium and by Paul Segredo. I hope I'm saying that right. Parallels between Olympians and entrepreneurs. And I just thought this was a fun topic because, it's some of the things that you might consider, like, working hard, training, all of those things. But I just thought it opened up like this way of thinking for me about, we are celebrating our 15th anniversary here at Experience Investigators this year. And I know
Nice.
you've been in business quite a
Congratulations.
long time. Thank you. And to think about the journey of an entrepreneur and how we get here and how that does compare. Of course, we're not, training in a gym with different coaches for 6 hours a day or whatever they all do, but I just thought the parallels were interesting. So I'd love your take on this,
Yeah.
and because you've
I was
been an
thinking about that as
entrepreneur
well.
for a long time.
There are tremendous parallels, but there's also a deviation. I look at um, these races that make them. I mean, they're training for their whole lives,
Mhm,
for this one moment. I The parallel I do is sometimes like spelling bees, right? You have all these things, all this stress. They work for years, and this one moment, and one person wins.
mhm,
Where we deviate is, as entrepreneurs, we're working, nobody's working 40 hours. We're working 60, 80, whatever that might be. We're not our own boss. Every client is a boss. Um, and it's not about that one moment. We're having that one moment all day, every day. And so
mhm,
the
mhm,
preparation is so important. Competing against others who are very, very, very good at what they do is a significant parallel. The
mhm.
difference is our race happens all day, every day, and we get up the next morning and we do it again all day, every day.
That's
And
well
for
said.
those of us who love what we do, it's awesome. Um, but it's not about one moment. It's about a
Mhm,
series of moments. And of course, here's the parallel with the customer experience. As you know, it's that series of moments
mhm,
that lead up and including and through the purchase and the delivery and the review and the final. Every one of those moments matter, and we're being
mhm.
evaluated at every one of those. We're competing against others who are very good at what they do in those moments
Yes.
again and again. And that's
Yep.
why it's a different breed for those of us who are entrepreneurs than those who get a paycheck. And there's benefits to both.
There
There's
are.
benefits. There's benefits to knowing what your next paycheck's going to be. Um,
Mhm,
but I think there's tremendous. But not everybody can be an Olympian. Not everybody's going to be able to is willing to put in the time and the effort to
mhm.
to compete and to run that race. And for those of us who are entrepreneurs, we're running our race every day.
Yep. Well said. Yes, I like that a lot. And, the other thing that kind of struck me as I was watching the Olympics this week was they mentioned how many of these competitors in the Olympics actually train together, right? Like they have the same coaches, or a lot of the international players come over and play college in the United States so that they can get that exposure. So they become teammates literally
Yeah,
with these people who they are competing against in the Olympics. And that kind of struck me too, because there are so many moments in entrepreneurship where maybe you can't do it alone. Maybe you need that boost from somebody else. Maybe that you can't be in two places at once. So we refer things to each other. We bring people in as we
absolutely.
need them. And I think that takes such a high level of trust and uh, just like trust of the person that you're of course bringing in, but also trust of yourself that what I can't do it this date, but you know what, I know this client is going to come back to me, or whatever that is, and that all comes back to the experience that we provide people too. And so this whole idea of kind of co-opetition,
There
I
you go. There's a new word.
I think that's very much part of the world we live in now.
Yeah,
So
and I look at it also from another perspective, which is, and I talk to audiences about this all the time, and I talk about the competitors, and I ask leaders, and I say, why you? What's that? And there's this pervasive belief that our businesses, we've created the cure for cancer that tastes like chocolate, right? And business and customers have but to know that we exist, and the reality is, I tell them, I said, your competitors. Here's the worst part about your competitors: they're all very, very good, and they're
mhm.
all, by and large, they're very, very nice people. They're
Yep,
just trying to feed their families just like we are. They're not the enemy. And I
right.
think we see the same thing in sports, and we see that camaraderie afterwards, and the coming together and the hugs, because we respect each other. We are competitors. But then much of my business is I speak a lot to associations. And so these are industries who are competitors, some are vendors and others,
Mhm.
but they come together just as we will this weekend as an industry for the National Speakers Association, but every industry comes together and they learn and they share and they grow together. And then they go
Yep.
back to their markets and they compete. But there is something about others who get us because they're also in whatever crazy industry you're in. That's why it's so important. I talk to business leaders and those who are watching and listening. You need to attend your industry events. You need to
Mhm.
know what's coming down the pike. You need
Yep.
to collaborate with others because maybe someday you'll get a referral. Someday they'll handle some overflow, but they're not enemies. They're
Right.
competitors and they're
Right.
colleagues, and we come together professionally. And athletes have that great esprit de corps as well that I really
Mhm.
respect.
Yep. I totally agree. And that's one of the things I talked about in kind of my retrospective about the 15 years was when you come together with the people who are in your industry, you're both able to learn and teach. And sometimes teaching is the best way to learn.
Yeah,
So it's like this wonderful virtuous cycle, I think, when we surround ourselves with people who we can learn from constantly, we can, experiment with, we can get those gut checks, all of those things. It's so, so important. So, well, I so appreciate you doing this with me,
thank you for
David.
having
And
me on. This is great.
I know you just came out with a new book. So can you tell us about your new book?
Why, sure. My new book is it's very much my mantra. It's my message. You and I are customer experience colleagues, but my whole thing today is about being ridiculously easy to do business with. I think we're in a time of pervasive quality. Everybody's good, and it always hasn't been that. Everybody's good or good enough. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a great equalizer when you look at Yelp and TripAdvisor and Rotten Tomatoes. If you were a poor player in a marketplace, you'd be discovered and outed pretty quickly. And so my new book, I'm very excited. It's been doing very well. We just sold the rights in
Yeah.
India. I'm doing a big European tour coming up in November, but it's on Amazon and audiobook, and well, it's coming out in audiobook and hardback and everything else. But
Excellent.
it's conversational and good stories and new statistics, and there's a lot of new learning in recent years, and much of it from our colleagues, who
Hmm.
I've quoted many as well in our industry. So pick it up. Ridiculously Easy to Do Business With by David Avrin.
Excellent. And that will, of course, be in the
Thank
show
you.
notes and available too. So, highly recommend. Yes, everything that we talk about is really for the betterment of everybody, and that's what excites me about the work that we do. It makes people's jobs easier. It makes being a customer easier, and it just makes, like, walking through life easier, and I
Yes.
think we could all use that. So, well, this was super fun. Thank you for being here with me at CX Pulse Check, and I can't wait to, see you IRL, as they say, pretty soon too. So, and thank you, everybody, for being here with me at Experience Action. As always, I am here to answer your questions on customer experience or anything that you want to throw at me. So check that out at askjeannie.vip, and I will talk to you next week.